The book is titled Chameleon. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, being a chameleon just means being able to adapt to any situation. I'm not the same person I am with my wife as I am with you. I'm not the same person I am with my wife as I am with my kids. I'm not the same person I am with my kids as I am with my friends. Or I am with a boss who I like or a boss who I don't like or visit. Like we're always chameleons all the time. It's just we're not conscious of it.
All right, guys, bang, bang. I've got Remi here with me. Remi, you've got this really interesting background where you were a Navy SEAL. You've gone on to have movies and books and TV shows and kind of this whole world of media and entertainment. When you think about your life, are you an entertainer, whether you're in uniform or you're now professionally working in the media and entertainment business? Like there is this element in the military of you're constantly entertaining those that are next to you, those you're interacting with. Like, is this just something that is a thread throughout your whole life of entertaining other people?
I don't, I mean, maybe when I was a kid for sure, when I watching movies and trying to mimic movies and especially like Martin Lawrence and Eddie Murphy and those guys trying to make my friends laugh. I would say, yeah, in my younger years, when I got into the military, I don't think so. I think for me, it was just all about getting the job done in all business. And in fact, it was towards the end of my career that I decided that I wanted to go into business consulting full time. And so I got my bachelor's and then in my last 2 years in the teams. And then right after I got out, I was in grad school getting my master's. And again, my plan was I was working with YPOers and other guys, essentially taking special operations principles that translates into business. And so that's what I was going to do. And then Hollywood came knocking, and then I kind of found my way in Hollywood a few months later. So it definitely wasn't something that was planned. It was something that kind of just came out of nowhere.
When you say that Hollywood came knocking, what do you mean?
I was in grad school, and I got out in January 2016. I was probably my second or third semester of grad school, getting my master's in organizational strategy. And that was January. And then fast forward to May of 2016, I was in my office, this very office right here, writing papers. And I got a phone call from a woman who worked with Michael Bay. And she said, "Hey, Bay's looking for a former Navy SEAL with your background to consult and work on Transformers: The Last Night." And she said, "Hey, can you send me some pictures?" First, she asked me if I was available. I said, "Yeah, I'm not doing anything but writing papers. I can get up to LA tomorrow." And then she asked me to send her some pictures, and I did. And the next day, I was on set. So that's essentially what I mean. I wasn't out here chasing it. Somebody just essentially knocked on my proverbial door and gave me a call. And then the next day, I'm working on set. And one day turned into 3 weeks, 3 weeks turned into 6 months. And it was in that period that I really began to realize that I love storytelling. I love being able to utilize my experiences, my background to help formulate and create and share a story, because story has such a huge impact on not just people in America, but people culturally and internationally all around the world.
One of the things that every single person I know in the military or every successful business leader is there's a sense of urgency, right? And there's also a sense of being open to opportunity, being able to kind of seize the moment. And so obviously if you get a phone call and the next day you're on set, that's like the epitome of doing this. Is that something that you've had your entire life? Did you learn in the military? Why are you uniquely able to do that versus someone who may be like, yeah, I'm interested, but I'll get back to you in 2 weeks and kind of, we'll go from there?
Yeah, I think it comes from the teams, being in the SEAL teams, where the acronym SEAL stands for sea, air, and land. And so it's kind of beat into us in SEAL training to this ability to be flexible, this ability to be a jack of all trades and be open. And we also train to contingencies. So once you get through SEAL training and then you get to your SEAL platoon and you do your workup, a lot of your workup, whether it's CQC, land warfare, diving, it's always not just training for the mission, but it's also training for the what ifs, right? The curveballs that come your way. And so I would say that was essentially ingrained in me through the community. And so when I got out, and this kind of curveball came my way, it was just like, all right, let's jump into it. For me, it was like, I know that wasn't my plan, and that's not what I wanted to do, but it's a part of my nature as a frogman to jump into crazy things and be open to the opportunity. And then once you get the opportunity or you get the curveball, you do it with excellence. So you operate within that space with excellence. So I would say wholeheartedly, it didn't come from my upbringing. It came more so from my time in the teams.
That makes a lot of sense. You were born in Nigeria and then ended up in the Bronx in New York. Talk a little bit about kind of your early childhood and some of the things that happened there, but also some of the lessons maybe you took away from it.
Yeah, so my dad, he was a very successful entrepreneur, businessman, you name it, he did it. He was one of the first Black men on the board of the World Trade Center in New York City, did a lot of business in New York City. And he was also one of the first Black men on the board of the British Financial Planning Council in Great Britain. And he amassed great wealth in the West. And then he returned to Nigeria. He's actually born in Nigeria. He's the firstborn son to my grandfather, Chief Adeleke. He had 9 wives, kept on having daughters. My dad was the firstborn son. So he inherited the title of chief and kind of became the heir to the Yoruba throne, so to speak. And so after his time in the West, again, he went back to Nigeria. And his plan was to essentially develop a African Wall Street. And it was the title of the project was Lagoon City. He bought a massive plot of land in Marico for 8 million pounds. This is in the 70s. There was a military coup shortly after, and that land got taken by the government. He went to court for a number of years, fought the Nigerian government. And then finally they came back and said, okay, we won't give you Marico, but what do you want for compensation? So he asked for a lagoon, and they laughed at him because they said, what are you going to do with a lagoon? And he hired Dutch engineers and dredged the foreshore and created one of the first man-made islands in the world, which is now known as Banana Island, but it was known as Lagoon City. I was born around that time. So I was born into riches and wealth, and we traveled the world, and my dad hosted parties with dignitaries, and one of his best friends was the designer architect of the World Trade Center, a Japanese guy. My dad was just super influential, and because of his success, we lived a great life. But fast forward to 1987, the Nigerian state government, the Nigerian government is inherently corrupt all around, but the state government came in and said that the federal government was never supposed to give my dad the lagoon as compensation because the foreshore belongs to the state government. And they conveniently waited until the land had formed and construction had started on the island as far as buildings to do that. So, they all knew what was going on for the years that it took to turn this lagoon into an island, but they conveniently waited. My dad went to go fight him in court, died mysteriously 3 weeks later, and we went from very rich to very poor. And my mom, then being American, brought my brother and I back to the States, and we grew up in the Bronx. It was a very rough environment. Crackheads, drug dealers, crime. I remember seeing the mafia guys go into the corner stores with their big collars and shake down the store owners for their taxes. It was a very, very rough environment. And as I grew older, 8, 9, 10, I began to become more conscious of my surroundings because my mom, she did a fantastic job of masking the reality of what had happened and keeping us in this bubble for as long as she could. But as I got older and I got a chance to venture off, that's when I began to notice things more so. And that's when I also began to try to find a father in the streets and hip hop culture, rap culture, all of these things that were prevalent in the late 80s and early 90s. And that led me down a really bad path. Started out stealing from my mom, and then that progressed to stealing from stores, that progressed to stealing from jobs, that progressed to selling drugs, and then that progressed to running high-level scams. And by the time I was 19, I had built a massive illegal enterprise where I was bringing in tens of thousands of dollars a week running a cell phone scam because cell phones had just become prominent. So that was in a quick nutshell, that was my Nigeria to Bronx upbringing.
Well, I want to unpack some of this because it's this fascinating story, right? Where basically you get the highs and the lows in a very short period of time, kind of as a kid when you're very formidable. When your dad was going through this, on one hand, there's this, probably proud of your father to go and fight back against the government and say, hey, no, look, you took my land. I need to be compensated for it. At the same time, as you described, there's this mysterious death. And I don't know how much kind of you guys know or didn't really spend the time to try to figure it out. How do you think back around, a private citizen, private property rights, and then government and kind of their ability to do things like that, whether it's in Nigeria or in any country really around the world? Like, what are some of the lessons maybe that you took away from that as a kid?
I was too young to really take away any lessons. I was 5 years old at the time. But I would say now as an adult, looking back in retrospect, is, just the greatness of America, our ability to have those rights and not have to worry about buying a house and then the government come along one day and saying that house doesn't belong to you. So, now it belongs to us. And just having the freedoms that we have here. So I look at it more so in retrospect, and I've been able to build wealth, starting from the bottom, but to where I am at now. I've been able to kind of build wealth because of the freedoms and the laws and the rules that we have in place, which do not exist in Nigeria. I get Nigerians on a daily basis that email me or message me on social media, and they say, please, can you please bring me to America? Or can you please come back to Nigeria and help fight the government and run for power? I get a lot of people that ask me to come back and run, get into politics. And I don't have a desire to, because I know how corrupt the system is. It's going to take a complete dismantling of the Nigerian political system in order for it to be what it can be. And Nigeria has the potential to be great because it's a very rich and resource country. When you look at the natural gas that can be produced, oil, cocoa, gold, and all these other minerals. I mean, look at what China's doing there. They're going into not just Nigeria, but other parts of Africa, and they're just buying up all of this real estate in order to be able to mine and pull these resources out because of the resources that are in Nigeria and in these other parts of Africa. And so Nigeria does have the potential to be a very wealthy and successful country where majority of the people are thriving, but the corruption is just so out of control. So I know that was a long answer, but it's short. That it's more of a retrospective look than essentially having an assessment when I was that early of an age.
Yeah, when I went to Nigeria and stayed in Lagos, and not on Victoria Island, but actually like in Lagos near a computer village, and I've told the story before on the podcast, the energy in Nigeria is just off the charts. Right, you're just walking around, and for whatever reason, it's just you just know it's a special place, and the way that people interact with you and with each other and stuff is something that you wish you could just bottle up. And you're like, man, this place has so much potential. And then you look at the population size and how fast it's growing, and the estimates that there's gonna be more Nigerians than Americans by 2050, and just all these different components. You're like, this place could be amazing. But when you talk to Nigerians, the government and the corruption is one of the things they point to, and they say, yeah, we just got this like governor on the speed we can go until we kind of fix that problem.
No, 100%. And the crazy thing is, like in the inner city of New York City or other inner cities, when people are in poverty, young people specifically, what do they look to get out of poverty for the most part? At least speaking from my experience, it's like sports, music, or, selling drugs, right? Because that's what they're exposed to. In Nigeria, every kid from the time they're young, they're taught, whatever you do, work your way into politics. Because if you can get into politics, then that's the way you can get rich. You have people who become governors or senators in Nigeria with having no wealth. They're just great talkers and great manipulators. And then they come out of office, billionaires, not millionaires, billionaires. And so that's the goal for a lot of people in Nigeria, is to get into politics, because they know, hey, once I get to as a matter of fact, I remember flying to Nigeria in 2018 to finish writing my book. And as soon as I got off the plane, the customs officer said, "What gift do you have for me? Like, do you have a gift for me? In order to get through customs, you have to give me a gift." And then we got pulled over, and the police said, "How much money are you going to give me in order to get through?" So it's so systemic, the corruption, and it's at whatever position somebody's at in Nigeria, from the smallest position as a customs officer, they're going to shake you down. And if they can shake you down for $5 as a customs officer, just imagine what the governors and the senators and the Ministry of Oil. I mean, it was a story that came out, I want to say around 2014, 2015, where the Ministry of Oil, they found, and again, I might be butchering the story, but the spirit of it is she was cutting side deals with other countries and shipping oil to these other countries. So if a shipment of oil costs, I don't know, $15 billion, I'm just throwing out a random number to give this example, she would sell it for $5 billion, pocket the $5 billion, the ship would disappear, the other country would get the oil, and now she's a billionaire. And then when she got caught, she jumped on a plane to London, and when the Nigerian government was like, you got to come back and face charges because you got caught, she's like, I have cancer, so I need to stay here and seek treatment. So, that's what that's not everybody, but that's what a good number of Nigerians, do in politics, is they just steal, and their kids are raised to, hey, don't try to become a basketball player or a doctor or a lawyer. Try to become a politician, because that's how you're going to get rich and be able to get your family out of the poverty that they're in, which is sad.
There's some families in America who have the same strategy of just getting
100%. 100%. Oh, yeah. And there are people who just go into politics for that reason, because but I would just say it's more widespread in Nigeria than it is, and it's more overt. It's more widespread and it's more overt in Nigeria. Here, it's more clandestine because of our rules and our laws and our rights. But hey, it's disgusting wherever it happens.
Completely agree. Talk about your mom. Obviously, being kind of in a situation where your father had generated great wealth. You went to Nigeria. You and your siblings were born there, and then all of a sudden, you kind of return back from wealth to a degree of poverty. Like, how did she handle that, navigate it, and was the move back to New York more of like running to the familiar, or was it running away from the situation? Like, how as you grew up did you kind of talk to her, or what did you learn?
Yeah, my mom she's just a beast. What I think there was a trigger for her. After my dad died, she contacted a cousin that she had grown up with, and he was well-to-do, a lawyer in New York City. And she reached out to him and said, I don't have a nickel to my name. I'm coming back to New York, or I'm back in New York. I can't remember the time period. This was shortly after my dad died, though. And can you just loan me some money until I can get myself together and get my kids squared away with food and clothing and schooling and all that. And about 5 minutes later, his wife called her back and said, how dare you call up my husband and ask him for money? Don't you ever do that again, and then hung up the phone on my mom. And it was in that moment that a switch went off in my mom's head. The boats have been burned. No one's coming to my rescue. I need to figure this out on my own. And so my mom, she worked multiple jobs. She started out as a teacher in the South Bronx, but then she would also work at museums and art galleries in Midtown Manhattan to be able to expose my brother and I to the arts for free so that we can get a secondary education through her teaching. She started a creative writing business called First Impressions Writing Services, where she would, again, teach, work at the museum, and then people would give her term. She was Chat GTP before there was a Chat GTP. And she would write term papers and resumes and letters for people and get paid. So she would just work, grind hard. I mean, she would wake up in the morning, before my brother and I would wake up, we had 17 flights in our 17 floors in our building. She would run up and down the stairs for a workout because she couldn't afford a gym, come back downstairs, wake my brother and I up, get us ready for school, send us to school. Then she would go work, come back from work, help us with our homework, work another job, feed us, work another job, and then put us down to sleep and then work some more. So that was something that I saw as a kid. And I would ask my mom, why are you working? Or I didn't understand it as a young kid. And then now I look back, it's because she was trying to provide for two boys. And again, she was trying to create an environment for us where we could thrive and become something. And I remember asking her in my early 20s, I said, Mom, why didn't you ever remarry? And she said, because I didn't want to bring any confusion into the house. And I knew that my main focus needed to be you guys, because if you and your brother were successful, then everything would be all right, and then I would be all right in the long run. And so that's why she worked as hard as she did, and it paid off. It all eventually paid off, but more importantly, it gave me the template for how to work. It showed me the importance of putting in the work and going the extra mile. My mom would always tell me and my brother, whatever you do, do it right the first time. She would make my brother and I read New York Times articles and books and then write reports on those books and articles. And if the reports weren't near perfect, which for me as a kid, my brother, he's an engineer, so he would do better than me. She would make us pick another article, book, and start all over again from scratch, right? And what she was trying to instill in us was the importance of doing everything right the first time and doing everything with excellence. And she was also trying to instill into us the importance of being able to write, because from her perspective, if you knew how, if she figured if my brother and I knew how to articulate ourselves in a literary format, we would never be without a job. We would always be able to work. And so she was just forward thinking in that sense. And so I say all that to say, she set the template for me. And I know without an unequivocal doubt that I would not have made it through the military, made it into SEAL training, made it through SEAL training, be who I am and where I'm at today without that constant reminder and that example as a young boy of hard work and the importance of hard work.
So how do you go from doing book reports and article reports to running cell phone scams? That's a jump, right? And to some degree, it's like inside the house, almost like you're one person, and then it seems like outside the house you're a different person, right? Like talk through a little bit as to how that happens, and how do you balance that in your head now?
Yeah, I was a chameleon, just like the title of my book right there, Chameleon. I learned how to be a chameleon at an early age. I learned, okay, this is how I need to be with my mom to keep her off my back and figuring out what I'm doing. And this is who I need and how I need to be when I'm out in the streets doing what I'm doing. I needed to do, not like exceedingly above and beyond in school, but I needed to meet the standard in school. And as long as I'm meeting the standard in school and I'm graduating to the next grade on time, she's going to stay off my back. So, and that will allow me to do what I do. So I would so the easiest answer to that was I was a chameleon. And for me, it was, especially at a young age, it was all about making money. And I think a big part of that also was I had my dad's entrepreneur DNA and mindset, so I didn't really want to work for people. And that's why when I did work for people, I stole, or I figured out a way to create a business out of the business that I was working in, if that makes sense. And so it all boiled down to wanting to make money and wanting to be affirmed. I think that was also a big part of it. I believe that every boy needs a father to affirm him and to teach him how to be a man. If not, he's going to seek affirmation from other things, people, relationships, etc. And that's the same thing with every girl. Every girl needs a father to teach her how to be loved by a man, and to a father to affirm her so that she's not seeking affirmation in relationships and the wrong things. And so in retrospect, I can say that the main reason why I got into the stuff that I got into was because unconsciously I was seeking that pat on the back from my dad that I never got because my dad died. I was seeking for people to, hey, you're the man, you're doing great, you're doing this. And so that's why I was able to progress from doing things I was doing to selling drugs and eventually, running the high level scams, the cell phone scams.
What was the scam?
So there was I won't mention the cell phone company's name, but I was able to get a license with a cell phone company. We'll just call it WCT because that's what I named them in my memoir, Transform. But I was working with this company called WCT, and I was able to get a license to sell phones. This when cell phones had just come out. The first phone was like the Nokia, and it had the Snake game on it, and then you had the Motorola flip phones and all that, and everybody was enticed, especially in New York City, by this. And so what I would do was I eventually connected with a guy who I went to high school with, and his girlfriend worked at a hospice. And so he would get me names, date of births, addresses, social security number, and then I would activate phones so on one person's line of credit, I could activate up to 3 phones. And the bill wouldn't come in for 30 days. And then the person had 30 days to pay the bill, which they wanted. So then the phone would stay on for 60 days. And then in 90 days, the phone would turn off. And so I found a niche, with drug dealers because they loved the phones because they had unlimited cell phone calling because I was doing unlimited phone calls before unlimited minutes before it existed because they would have the phone for 90 days, unlimited phone calls, and then it would turn off, and then I would get them a new one, so they weren't easy. It was hard for them to be tracing the people whose information we were using were essentially either on their way to on their deathbed or they had died in the process of me activating the phone. So nobody was looking in on it. And so essentially that was the cell phone scam. And I would sell the phones for between $300 and to $900 depending on the phones. And then the Motorola two-way pagers came out, which were they looked like little miniature laptops, and there was a gray one and a black one. And so I would sell those for about $500 to $600 a pop. And that's essentially how I was making money. And then I started a record company. I keep this on my desk as a reminder because this was our compilation album. And I would essentially launder the money through the record company. And my exit plan was to essentially, get enough compilations albums together and sell some numbers so that we could track and we could show proof of concept to record companies and then sign a label deal, because that's what, Jay-Z and Damon Dash did at the time. They were selling drugs. They used drugs to essentially fund their music business. And then that's how that was their exit plan, the music business, and Murder Inc. and a lot of these other guys. So I was trying to follow that template. So that was a cell phone scam, and that's kind of how it all worked together.
So you go from that to 2002, I think it is, you enroll in the Navy. And what you mentioned earlier is your dad was on the board of World Trade Center. He knew the designer or the engineer and architect of the World Trade Center. 9/11 drove the decision to join the Navy, or completely unrelated?
No, it was completely unrelated. I had ended up getting involved in a deal with a drug dealer that went bad, sold them a number of phones that were supposed to stay on for 90 days. They only stayed on for 2 weeks. He had already flipped the phone, so if I sold him the phone for $500, he in turn sold the phone for $1,000. So he owed a lot of people money, and they were upset. So after he threatened my life, my mom's life was threatened. Huge wake up call for me. That's when I decided, hey, I'm not doing this anymore, and tried to sell the record company. That didn't work itself out. And then finally, in 2002, that's when I kind of looked at my life and I saw that my life hadn't amounted to anything. And I realized that if I stay in the Bronx, I'm going to either end up dead or in prison, because there were people who were doing the same things that I was doing, and they were ending up in federal prison. And so it was more self-preservation. It wasn't about, hey, let me join the military after an act of war, 9/11, or any of that stuff. Let me just join the military, because if I don't, I'm going to end up dead. And so I went to go join, and then the recruiter, she ran my background, and she found out that I had 2 warrants out for my arrest, which I didn't know. I had a warrant in New Jersey and I had a warrant in New York. I was petrified because at this point I didn't know what the warrants were for. So at the time, and so I thought it was for the stuff that I was doing, and as it related to the phones. And got ready to run out of the office, and she stopped me right before I got out. Right before I crossed the threshold, and she said, "Hey, where you going?" I said, "I'm getting out of here." She said, "You have a suit?" I said, "No." She asked me if I had a collared shirt and some nice pants. I said, "I'm sure I could find something." And she told me to come back tomorrow. And I said, "For what?" She snapped at me and said, "Just come back tomorrow, okay?" And growing up in the streets of the Bronx, especially when I was hustling, I had to learn how to read people, and that would later serve me well. And when I got into human intelligence, and from her response and reaction and the way she had been for the last hour I was in her office, I was able to read that whatever it was that she was going to do for me, it was going to be good. I didn't know exactly what it was going to be, but I knew that it would be good. And so I came back the next day, and she took me to both judges. She had on her dress uniform and took me to both judges, to judge in New Jersey, judge in New York, advocate on my behalf. She kind of used the 9/11 as a way to get me in. She said, "Hey, he's trying to join the Navy after an act of war. 9/11 took place 9 months earlier, and I think you should give him a shot, because he can't join the military with warrants or a record." And the first judge expunged my record. I just had to pay court fees and court fines. And the second judge, who he was the courthouse was coincidentally blocks away from Ground Zero. So there was a lot of empathy there. He expunged my record, and then that was kind of how, and then she fudged the paperwork to sneak me into the Navy, and that's kind of how it all happened. So it was all about self-preservation.
So when you get in, do you go straight to SEAL training or you go to the regular Navy first?
Yeah, I go to the regular Navy first. I wasn't qualified academically. I didn't have the ASVAB scores, and I couldn't swim, and I was super skinny. So I went to Naval Hospital Camp Pendleton first. I did a year there, and I just as soon as I got there, I just trained hard. I didn't have a car, so I'd run 3 miles uphill to the pool, jump in the shallow end, try to figure it out, run 3 miles back. I got an ASVAB for Dummies book, which is like an SAT book, and I studied that book religiously, and then I watched a Buds 234 documentary and saw how the guys worked out, and I built my workout plans around what they did. And within a year of checking into the command, I was checking out and on my way to SEAL training. So it was a year process.
What was training like?
Buds, it sucked. I mean, it sucked. And being I couldn't get away with anything because, less than 1% of Navy SEALs are African American. And then when every class that I had been in, I'm like one of three African Americans in the class. And so I couldn't get away with anything, 1, 2. So I stood out like a sore thumb. And then on top of that, I the cold water, I had no body fat. So when I'm in the ocean, I'm freezing. At the end of every 2-mile time ocean swim, I'm either borderline hypothermic or hypothermic. So that sucked. And it's just a brutal process, man. And it has to be because they're trying to create warriors who will be able to go in any situation, outnumbered, outgunned, and still get the job done. And so it's absolutely necessary, and it has to be tough. I mean, the attrition rate is anywhere between 80 and 90%. The class I graduated with started with 270, 29 of us finished. And that's just the way it is every class. So it sucked. It sucked bad, but it was necessary.
I've talked to a lot of SEALs about this. What do you think about all the public pressure to make it softer, to basically water it down?
I hate it. I think it's all political for diversity's sake. I say that in air quotes. I think, that's a job where you have to have a person in it that's qualified. You know what I mean? And it's not a job where you can water it down and to get numbers in or to meet a quota. Otherwise, you're going to create casualties. I will say that the SEAL teams, Buds training, and in the SEAL teams, that was the first community that I felt like I was a part of that didn't care at all, whether I was black or white. They didn't care. All they cared about was, can you do your job? Can you perform? And if you can't perform, you're out of here. If you can perform, then you stay in. And I hate the idea of people trying to, politicians, and the majority of people who are trying to water it down, change it, are people who didn't serve or will have never served, not just in the military, but in special operations. So it's easy to armchair quarterback and say, why aren't there enough of this group or that group in there? Why aren't there enough blacks in there? Why aren't there enough women and this and that? And how about you go through training first and then you tell me why?
Well, and I think what many people don't realize, I was in the regular Army, and special operations is even that on steroids, is the trust that a team needs, right? And so to your point, it's not only can you do your job, in training, but I'm assuming when you're kicking in a door in Iraq or Afghanistan, you need to know that the person next to you can shoot straight, can move, can communicate, has your back, is going to not fucking run out of the building the first time someone shoots back. Like all these different things, that trust and that confidence and competence that comes with having people who've gone through the training is a huge piece. Like the psychological component is really important.
100%. It's total buy-in. I like the example you used was perfect. When I go into it, when I was doing direct action missions, downrange, I won't mention the countries that I operated in, but when I was doing DA missions and we went, I was a point first man in, a second man in. I knew if I was first man in, the guy behind me is going to cover my corner, be the second man in, right behind me, covering down the section that I can't see. I didn't have to worry about, is he going to, after I go in, is he going to really clear his corner, or am I going to get shot in the back by somebody who's hiding in the corner? I knew that he was going to do what he was going to do. And even more than that, I knew that when poop hit the fan, like when things were out of control, that dude was not going to quit at that. Because it's not just about the fear of going in and somebody running out because they're scared of getting shot at. It's more about, you're half your platoon has been shot up, or the birds crashed, or you've been on an op for freaking 8 hours and it's 130 degrees out. It was just supposed to be a quick snatch and grab. And you know that each guy is still going to give 110%. You know that each guy is not even paying attention to the fact that he might have been shot and bleeding out. I mean, case in point, lone survivor. That's a great case study right there. You know, that proves why we do what we do, because, you know, those guys, Marcus and Axel and Murph and those guys, they were in the middle of a storm and they kept on fighting. They weren't fighting for themselves. They kept on fighting for the guy to their right, and they left outnumbered, shot up, you know, guy died, another guy died, still fighting for each other. And that perseverance, that no quit attitude in the face of ominous, absolute distress, death, you name it. You can only get that out of the program that we come out of. And so yeah, man.
Well, I think a big part of it too is you can't recreate that scenario or other types of scenarios in training, but you sure can put people through a lot of pain, right? Oh, yeah. and kind of test them mentally. And so how much of the training did you feel was physical versus mental?
It's all mental. In my opinion, every guy that shows up to training physically has what it takes to be there and make it. Otherwise, you want to get in. You got to pass like a 500-yard swim, push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, certain numbers, all that other stuff. And you can't just pass it. You have to score what's called competitive scores. And then you got to take a physical examination and a psychological, all this stuff. So every single person that shows up has what it takes physically. The question now becomes who has what it takes mentally. All the instructors are doing, and this is what we did on the Special Forces Fox show, and this is what I do when I work with corporations and pro athletes. All we're doing is taking physical tools to drive home intellectual points. We're using the physical to challenge them mentally. And that's what it's about at the end of the day. So for me, my personal opinion, it's 90% mental, 10% physical. I mean, and the 10% physical, I mean, they're just using that 10% to push that 90% within your psyche and your brain.
So one of the things I hear people who've never served in the military before, never gone overseas or anything like that, they'll talk about fear and how fear really is this thing that obviously soldiers don't get scared, right? Obviously SEALs don't get scared. Talk a little bit about fear, whether you ever were scared, when you're out in the field or operating on missions, and whether that was something that could be debilitating or actually something that you could use to your advantage and kind of spur yourself into action.
Yeah, I think fear is good. Fear is a good thing because it keeps you from doing the wrong thing, in my opinion. My greatest fear when going on missions, it wasn't death. I gave up the fear of death the moment I raised my hand and said, I'll join the military. And then even more so when I freaking said, I'm going to go to Buzz. And then even more so when I said, I'm going to be a frogman, because I knew that I could die at any moment. And you have to give up that fear of death. My greatest fear was doing something or not doing something that would lead to the serious injury or death of my teammate. That was my fear. And that fear was good because it really helped focus me on doing the right things. As I said, I was a medic, but I was also a HUMINT guy, which stands for human intelligence. And so I got to go to different intelligence schools, and I had to learn how to run sources and do all that cool stuff, tradecraft, all that cool stuff. And that's kind of where Chameleon kind of came out of. And so I was building the intelligence packages that would lead to us going on direct action missions. And so I had to really vet my information with my sources and against other information and double vet it and check it because my fear was getting a piece of information, or maybe I'm in a meeting with a source and I'm not paying attention to all the telltale signs. Is he lying to me? Is he just trying to send me to a place where me and my team go into the building and then somebody clacks off a bomb and we're all dead? I had to focus even more so. And that focus came out of that fear of leading my teammates into a situation that's going to kill them. Right. And so fear is good, and it was always good. But again, it was more so the fear of doing something or not doing something that would hurt or lead to the death of my teammates. And that's something that, when I'm talking to entrepreneurs and CEOs of companies, that's something that I always preach. I said, utilize that fear, but don't utilize it in a selfish way. Think about your employees. Think about your subordinates. Think about, okay, is this decision going to be a decision that is not going to just hurt me, but it's going to hurt my teammates? And in return, by hurting my teammates, hurt my bottom line. One thing I always try to tell leaders is that, it's the importance of taking a genuine interest in your people. Because if you take a genuine interest in them, not just see them as a stepping stone or a sled dog or whatever the tag we put on it, your people are going to want. Not only they're going to want to meet the standard. They're going to want to blow past the standard. They're going to want to be willing to run through walls. And that was something I learned in the SEAL teams. I had an OIC who just really took a genuine interest in us, and so we wanted to perform beyond the standard. It wasn't about him prying into our personal business. It was about him letting us know, hey, I care about you. What's going on? How's your day? How's things back at the family? What can I do to support you? What can I do to help make your job easier? And in doing all of those things and actually caring about us, we wanted to work 10 times harder. And when you have that fear of disappointing your subordinates or disappointing your teammates, it's going to lead to you making the right decisions, so that when and making the right decisions, it's just going to create this cycle of success within your team, within your organization. And so fear is good.
When you think about the book and this black box thriller is kind of how it's described, it is based on your experiences. So it is not your story, but it is a story that is rooted in this experience that you had. Talk a little bit about human intelligence and what does that really entail? And then how much of what people see on television or in movies is real versus is just dramatized because it's entertaining, but it isn't part of the actual job.
So I would say that Black Box Chameleon is a fictional extension of my life. It's in Transform, my memoir. I couldn't go into the details about what I did and how I did it. And so this was my way. Chameleon was my way to be able to do it in a safe way where I'm totally fictionalizing everything and creating different programs and so on and so forth. But human intelligence is it's using humans to collect intelligence. That's the easiest way to explain it. A good film comp would be one, as a matter of fact, and I could say this, in one of the courses that I went to, the instructors played us scenes from Spy Games. So if anyone has seen Spy Games, that's, without me kind of giving away information that I shouldn't be giving away to the general public, that's a good comp for what we do. That's a good example of, finding somebody who, and that's part of the job. Part of the job is finding somebody who has information or can get access to information that you need for a mission, or maybe not even a mission, maybe just to get an idea of what's going on in the environment that you'll be working in, right? It's finding that person, befriending that person, which is building rapport with that person, and then at some point, tasking that person to do work for you, to collect intelligence for you. Because me, as a big Black dude from the Bronx, you know what I mean? I couldn't walk down the street of certain places in the Middle East, or even in some parts of Africa, because even though I'm Black, Africans can kind of snoop out an American easily, for the most part, and so we don't have the ability to walk down the street and get these jobs done. And so it takes these people, these humans, hence human intelligence, to go help collect that information. And it's about training them and getting them up to speed and knowing when to pitch and when not to, and reading them as well. It's a big part of it. And that's why I would say that growing up in the Bronx really helped prepare me for that job, because you have to learn how to read people, especially when you're doing the crazy stuff that I was doing. You have to learn how to read people, or else you're going to end up, talking to an undercover cop instead of talking to, a client, and ended up in prison. And so that's essentially human. It's utilizing people to collect intelligence for you.
Now, if you and I just were to sit down and talk about, kind of this storyline, I think that I could learn a lot, right? Somebody who's interested in this stuff would pick up a lot of details and information and kind of just intellectually be stimulated. but you
Yeah.
originally wrote it as a screenplay and converted it into a book, which means that it's got to be entertaining as well, right? And so talk a little bit as to when you sit down to write a fiction book versus the nonfiction kind of memoir style, it's very different writing. And so how did you kind of get yourself into the mindset and be prepared to actually write the fiction component after having such a successful nonfiction book?
Yeah, I think it wasn't too hard for me because in part, I wrote a few fiction screenplays before jumping into the fiction book. So I had writing the nonfiction book to help essentially give me the standard, right? It helped give me my right and left limits as it relates to writing a book, because those right and left limits are a lot wider when it comes to a book than writing a screenplay. And then after writing my first book, that's when I wrote my first screenplay, which was actually Chameleon, and those limits shrink exponentially because you don't have as much space and latitude to explain and give a sense of the world and have the characters give these long monologues. You don't have the space to do that in a screenplay. You have to get all of this information out in such a small encapsulated way. And so writing Chameleon as a script and then writing other screenplays that I worked on, fictional screenplays, it really, that's what helped me transition back into writing my book, because now I had these restrictions in the fiction space as it related to screenplay. So now I was able to now expand that into a book. So that's what I would say helped me the most, was having that experience as a screenwriter and writing those screenwriting books, and then now being able to go back to that fiction length or standard, going back to that nonfiction length and standard that I did in Transform, having that same length in Chameleon, but now taking all my fiction experience from 3-act structure, character arc, the hero's journey, which you can't really do much of in a nonfiction space, because there's just certain storylines in nonfiction spaces that don't fall into the hero journey, or if they do, we would talk about 30, 40 years that you got to stretch into the hero's journey. That's not the way the hero's journey works. And so screenwriting and then really helped me tremendously.
Talk about kind of reviewing the book, right? So obviously you can have tons of people who are writers or editors, and they can go and they can read words and they can tell you, hey, put a comma here, don't put a comma here, use this grammar, whatever. But the substance of the book is not very well known by many people. It's not like we're writing about, hey, we went to the restaurant, and then people are like, oh, I've had that experience, right? You're talking about things that are very specific. And so you've got a friend who I think was a CIA agent who read it and was helpful in getting you to convert it from the screenplay into the book. But did you have other people, whether they're Navy SEALs, other teammates, et cetera, kind of read through and just, hey, give me a gut check, like this is realistic and makes sense? Or did you kind of just have to fly, blind on that part?
Yeah, no, I did. Jack Carr, who he's been very successful with the Terminalist series, which got turned into a TV show, which I had the pleasure of working on that TV show as well. He was the first person that I sent the book to, because, he knows the audience and he knows how to write in a way that's not so heady, that's not above the head of the average person that doesn't have experience in the world that we operate in. And so he was the first guy I sent it to, and dude, his quote is on the cover of the book. His blurb after reading the book is on the cover of the book. But he gave me some really good feedback and thoroughly enjoyed it. And then Brad Thor, who he wasn't in the world that I was in, but he has a lot of experience writing those type of, he's been doing it for decades, #1 New York Times bestseller multiple times over. And so, sending it to him and having him read it and give his input. So he was also very beneficial. And then Taylor Moore as well, him having worked in the agency, and I had to kind of lean on him a little bit more so than the other guys, because this is not a Navy SEAL book. You know what I mean? This is not a book about Navy SEALs. This is a book about a world that I've never operated in. Yes, I did the human stuff, but I never operated on a CIA level where I was, doing all that cool extra tier 1 type stuff in the agency. So I really did have to rely on those guys, and it was helpful for sure.
Talk about the business behind all of this. Like you mentioned, Jack Carr is a good example, right? I don't know. I've lost count of how many books he's written at this point, but it just seems like he keeps launching books. They're successful, right? He's obviously got the Amazon TV series that you mentioned. He's just become, somebody who crossed over from the military world into kind of television, media, entertainment, and been very successful. You seem to be on a very similar trajectory in terms of you've got TV shows, you've got movies and screenplays and now books, and just kind of you're hitting on all of these different components. How do you think about the business? Is it just you're the business? Is it more of like a publishing type house? Like, just talk to me a little bit as to like when somebody says to you, like, what are you building? How do you answer?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm building. It's a business. It all falls under one umbrella, which is my eighth wonder. That's funny because it's the name of my music company. I kind of retain that name for my production company, but it all falls under that. It's a storytelling business. It's and our motto is to tell authentic stories and do it in an authentic and grounded way, whether that's through a book, whether that's through a TV show, whether that TV show is unscripted or scripted, like Special Forces Fox. I mean, I wasn't going to sign on to do that show unless it was going to be as authentic and real as it was, and that was one of my no-go criteria as it related to doing a show. So, yeah, man, it's everything falls under that one business, and for me, it's all about how can one thing elevate the next thing, and elevate the next thing, and elevate the next thing. So, yeah.
When you see the books, the TV shows, and the movies, what is your favorite? And how do you actually decide if you can only work on one project for the rest of your life, right? Like you get one last one. What's the evaluation criteria? Or how do you think about like what you uniquely find enjoyment in?
What is going to have the most impact? That's for me is whether it's a book, TV show, film, what's going to have the most impact, because it was story that changed the trajectory of my life. I kind of breezed through my story a little bit, but the first film that began to change and shift my mindset was Bad Boys, because that was the first film where I saw two African Americans who looked like they were cool, but they were playing heroes. And so I remember being about 14 when that movie came out, and I was or 15, I can't remember exactly. And that's when I was just like, holy crap, like I could be something other than an athlete, drug dealer, or a rapper. And then a year later, The Rock came out, and was my first time I was exposed to Navy SEALs. And so those two films changed. They shifted my mindset and changed the trajectory of my life. And so that's the power of story. And I meet so many people, whether they're in the teams or outside or other avenues or other jobs, and you ask them, hey, why did you choose this career path? And they'll tell you, oh, I watched this movie, or I read this book, or I listened to this podcast, and I was just super inspired. And I was just like, that's what I want to do. That's how I discovered what I wanted to do in life, was through a story. And so because I understand the impact of story, that's why for me, that's how I choose what I'm going to do. Is it going to have an impact? And yes, it is a business, right? So a part of it is, yes, we do want to make money, right? I'm not doing this for charity, but at the end of the day, I want what I'm doing to have some type of social or cultural impact, or impact on somebody on a individual level. Like I mentioned when we were offline, the underlying theme in my book Chameleon which doesn't come to the surface until the end, was this importance of national unity. There's so much disunity in our nation, and if we continue down this divided path, it's going to ultimately lead to our destruction. And so, I wanted to intertwine that in the story because I want that to impact people. I want people to wake up and be like, I do hate this person because they're part of this political party, but maybe I should just go have a conversation. Maybe I should try and build a relationship, or maybe I should just not attack that person because of our political differences. And, I always try to say, unity, there's a process to unity. It starts with conversation. Conversation leads to understanding, and understanding is what ultimately leads to some form of unity. And so, again, going back to the answer, it's all about what is going to have the most impact especially in the time period that I'm operating or working in, whether that's making a film. And that was one of the reasons why I made my organ harvesting short film, which is now going to be a feature film. And it is because I saw a need for it. I was working in the human trafficking space, volunteering with different nonprofits. I saw that I was unconscious of the realities of human trafficking until I got into that space. And then I was just like, damn, like I didn't know much about this. I'm sure a lot of other people don't know a lot about this. And so how can I get more people engaged in this fight against this global issue called human trafficking? And I was like, oh, let's make a film. Let's impact. And so now I shifted my focus from other things that I had already accomplished to, all right, this is my focus because this type of project is going to have a bigger impact. And I made that short film, and now that short film is going to be a feature film. And so it all comes back to what is going to have the most impact in the moment. That's how I choose what I work on.
When you think back over the media and entertainment work that you've done, is there one moment that you can point to and say, that's when I knew I could do this?
Yeah, I was working on Six Underground with Michael Bay. I was in Italy, and it was a big star-studded cast with Ryan Reynolds and Corey Hawkins and a bunch of other people. And Michael Bay was like, we were shooting a scene, and he had me next to him at the monitor, and he was like, "Yo, what do you think? You know, how would you?" He wasn't asking because he needed an answer, but he was just, asking to just kind of see where my head visually as a storyteller was. And he was like, "What would you think? How would you shoot this?" And I told him, and then he went and it was like, "All right, I'll try it out. I'll try it out on this take." And he did it, and it was cool. I don't know if he ended up using that take in the final edit, but that was when I was like, I could do this. Because from a storytelling standpoint, it doesn't get that high. The stakes don't get that high as it does when you're a director, right? Writing a book, there's not a lot of money on the line, really, when you're writing a book for the most part, right? Acting in a movie, I mean, you're getting paid your check and you're getting told to perform a certain way, but the director is the one that's in charge of everything and in charge of, millions of dollars, in some films, hundreds of millions of dollars. And so to be able to be handed, the reins for a millisecond and accomplish something, that was when I was like, you know what, I could do this.
It is it's incredible to hear kind of your story and see the success that you've had. Do you think that there's going to be more SEALs and people from the military who kind of follow in these footsteps? You mentioned, Jack and a few others that have kind of started to do this. There's obviously the SEALs specifically who've had certain experiences. So you mentioned Marcus Luttrell, that either are able to turn their stories into movies or books and that type of stuff. But even just for the person who, yes, they were in the military, but they didn't necessarily have some experience that turns into a specific book or a movie. How do you kind of see that transition becoming easier, or maybe it's still going to be hard regardless of how much success you, Jack, or anybody else has?
I think it's always going to be hard. I mean, the book, film, and TV, but the entertainment business in general is it's a tough nut to crack. Even with people who are experienced and have been doing it for a number of years, there's a saying in Hollywood, for a movie to get made, it takes a miracle. And so I think that it's going to remain hard to get in, but at the end of the day, those who really want it, kind of like when it came to, not just SEAL training, but every other special operations training, even the military in general, right? Like you gotta have if you have a deep-rooted emotional reason as to why you want to do it, that's going to anchor you, and you're going to keep holding out and push through and eventually get through. But I don't see it ever being easier at all. Yeah.
My last question for you is, the book is titled Chameleon. You mentioned earlier, like that's kind of who you were. What does that mean to you? Right? What exactly is that in someone's life, and how could they maybe take the lessons that you've had in your life and then become a chameleon in theirs?
Yeah, I mean, being a chameleon just means being able to adapt to any situation. And I would say that that's also like somewhat of a business lesson. It's not a business book per se, but there is a business lesson that people could take away from reading the book, is like how and when to adapt. You know what I mean? And when to become what you need to become, because the reality is we're all chameleons all the time. I'm not the same person I am with my wife as I am with you. I'm not the same person I am with my wife as I am with my kids. I'm not the same person I am with my kids as I am with my friends. Or I am with a boss who I like, or a boss who I don't like, or a business, right? Like, we're always chameleons all the time. It's just we're not conscious of it. And so, I would just say to people that, that's kind of that's how it all came to me. That's what it means to be a chameleon, is to really be focused on being what you need to be in the moment or in the situation to get the job done. And that's what I hope people are able to take away from the book. And even when we get to there's a lot of interrogations in the book, right? And at the end of the day, that's what business negotiations are. Sometimes it's like, how do you get this information out of a person that you need to get out of the person, so that way you can negotiate a better deal? And so even in the writing of those interrogation scenes, I tried to put some of those business negotiation beats and edicts into those interrogations, so that people can be, oh, that's a good idea. Maybe I'll try that technique. Maybe I'll try this when I'm in the business room negotiating. So that's what I hope people get out of the book, is one, the importance of political and not just political, but national unity in our nation. And two, hey, we're all chameleons. Let's just focus on being chameleons for the greater good.
I love that. Where can we send people to find you on the internet or find the book?
Yeah, so you can find me anywhere on social media: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. Remi Adeleke. I got a unique name, so it's not the official. It's just Remi Adeleke. And the book, you can find the book wherever books are sold. I did the audiobook read, so if you're an audiobook person, Audible, iTunes, wherever. If you're just a regular book person, like to read the printed copy, then Barnes & Noble's, Amazon, wherever books are sold.
It's nothing like having the actual author do the audio book. But I will tell you, I'll leave you with one funny joke or stories. I was listening to Ray Dalio's got a book that came out, and he reads like the first chapter or two. And it's like, all right, now I'm going to hand it off to this other person. And he like hoodwinks you a little bit, right? You're like,
that's funny.
He's got like a real specific voice. It's kind of like a raspy voice, and he's reading. You're like, okay, I got it. Ray's reading the book he wrote, whatever. And then he hands it off. And you're like, hey, man, where'd you go?
Hey, I bet he sold a lot of books like that, because everybody listens to the first chapter. They're like, oh, I'm gonna, because I think now on Audible, they allow you to listen to the first chapter. So
maybe that's why he did it. Who knows?
Yeah. That's funny.
Awesome. Remi, listen, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I really enjoyed talking with you. And you've had this amazing career. One, thank you for serving our country and protecting people here at home.
Thank you for your service as well.
Yeah, well, I always think about military veterans are always looking for what's the next thing, right? You talked about adaptability, and it's really powerful that you kind of had an idea coming out of the military, what you wanted to do, and then saw an opportunity and just capitalized on it. And I think that it is inspiring for a lot of other veterans who say, look, maybe I know what I want to do, maybe I don't, but there is something that is possible. I don't just have to go be a defense contractor or go and work in, security or whatever. I can go do some of these other things. And so just keep doing you. And I really appreciate it. And I think everyone else does as well.
Same. I appreciate you, brother, and thank you, and keep crushing it. And I see your wife is coming out with a book soon, so let me know. I'll be pumping that out there as well.
You and her can compete with each other.
Yeah, well, two different worlds. I think hers is nonfiction, right?
Yeah, nonfiction.
Yeah. Let me know how I can help support her, man, and tell her congratulations on that as well.
All right, I appreciate you.
Yeah, all right, brother.